going on now. It's the Memorial Day sale at Bray & Scarf. Now's your last chance to beat upcoming manufacturer price increases. Save up to 35% on select GE Profile and Cafe appliances. And save on in-stock GE refrigerators and best-selling washers and dryers. Plus, get next-day delivery, online delivery day tracking, and delivery day installation. Visit any of Bray & Scarf's convenient locations or shop online at brayandscarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Ace the vibe check with drinks like lemonade, frozen Fanta Blue Raspberry, or any size drink for just $1.49. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Hello, and welcome to The Big Debrief, a weekly roundup, top stories grabbing headlines and attention across Canada. I am David Smith, and I'm here with Cormac, Sweeney, and Kris, McCusker. So this week we'll focus on one story. It's the biggest story in the country, and that is Mark Carney's new government. Officially sworn in on Tuesday, Carney and his cabinet got to work this week in Ottawa, and there were some stumbles out of the gate. So let's go through it. Let's start by rewinding the clock to Tuesday. Cabinet is revealed. It's supposed to signal change. That was telegraphed beforehand. Who's in, who's out. A new direction from the Trudeau era. But did they meet the mark? So Cormac, based on, you were there, you were at Rideau Hall, you watched it all unfold. For Tuesday, if we're only talking about Tuesday, the swearing in, do you think that Team Carney hit the mark when it comes to displaying change in the federal cabinet?
I think, they were always going to face some criticism regardless of the choices they made, because regardless of the prime minister, you're never going with anybody who doesn't have experience. Even if you're starting fresh as a government, let's look back to 2015 with Justin Trudeau when he put in place his first cabinet. You had a lot of people who had previously served as ministers under previous Liberal governments. You also have some people who have experience in terms of provincial parliaments, maybe serving in ministerial roles. So you're always going to need that element of experience at the table when you form a cabinet. You can't, you sometimes you might have to because you don't really have a choice, but you really want to make sure that you have a balance of experience and new, fresh faces. So there was always going to be that element that it was going to be easy for an opposition party to point to it and say, same old government, and you're just using the Trudeau Liberal cabinet ministers. However, there was a lot of change. You can't deny the fact that there are 24 new faces in cabinet. 13 of those have just been newly elected in just weeks prior to the naming of the government. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, whether they get accustomed to this role. Some of them have never served any time in politics before. Some of them were MPs in the previous government and won re-election and have now been promoted to cabinet when they didn't get that promotion or that option under Justin Trudeau. But I think one thing a lot of people were looking at was that key Canada-US file. And on that file, it seems like Carney decided to stick with the experienced cabinet ministers that he knew. Melanie Joly and Anita Anand have basically switched roles from foreign affairs and industry. Both important files when it comes to dealing with the U.S., but one will be a little bit more hands-on, foreign affairs, obviously, in terms of dealing with the U.S., while Melanie Joly sort of steps back into a more domestic file with industry, but very much important on that. Not a surprise that Dominic LeBlanc stayed in that trade portfolio. A little bit of a difference for him where he's now focused solely on Canada-U.S. trade. But that wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a shock. I think everyone expected that because he has an open line of communications with Howard Lutnick, who is by President Trump's side nonstop. We expected him to sort of stay in that role because that can go a long way when you have those open lines of communication. He has the president's ear, Howard Lutnick, and having Dominic LeBlanc, having the guy who has President Trump's ear, is going to be vital to what comes next in terms of these negotiations. But we'll see whether Canadians are really happy with this. I think we'll have to wait and see what some of the polls and reactions are to all of this. There was change, but I think they left open as well to the exact criticisms that we heard from Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre when he said that this is just the same old with the Trudeau government ministers in some of the most key portfolios, whether it be justice, defense, Canada-U.S. relations, foreign affairs, industry, etc.
Yeah, and on reaction, too, I mean, outside of the politics in the Ottawa bubble, a lot of people in the business community are definitely hoping for a more business-focused, business-oriented government. Kris, I'm curious what you saw, what you heard this week in terms of business community reaction to some of these cabinet picks. I mean, one name that jumps out is Tim Hodgson, former CEO of Goldman Sachs Canada operations, was actually an advisor to Mark Carney when he was governor of the Bank of Canada. But then again, you've got, in the finance portfolio, the new finance minister is François-Philippe Champagne. He'd spent his last term was in industry, which is kind of finance adjacent, but he's a lawyer by trade. He's not an economist or a businessman. What do you think?
Yeah, no, the Tim Hodgson is one that's going to be one to watch. I think he's been described as a bulldog. I don't really know what that means. I'm looking forward to seeing what that means. He recently stepped down as the chair of Hydro One, which is, of course, Ontario's largest electricity transmission and distribution provider. So he's, I guess, sort of, again, as you describe, natural resources, energy adjacent. And he does have a long relationship with Prime Minister Mark Carney, acting as an advisor going back, more than a decade before Carney was recruited to the Bank of England. That's going to be one to watch. As far as Champagne is concerned, I was sort of surprised that he was given the finance portfolio, mostly because, as you point out, I mean, he's not an economist, and, Mark Carney clearly knows about economic issues, but also because he was also a high-profile minister in Justin Trudeau's cabinet. And if Mark Carney was looking to sort of reset and bring in new faces, Cormac, as you nicely outlined, there are a lot of the same names are floating around. I mean, positions have changed, jobs have changed, portfolios have changed, but a lot of familiar faces still in cabinet and still pretty high level visibility within this government. I was struck a little. It felt like Melanie Joly was slightly demoted, which I found interesting. It also was interesting to me that Krista Freeland, who has a very close personal relationship with Mark Carney. I learned this week that Mark Carney is the godson to her son, or the godfather to her son. I found it interesting that she was not a higher profile, but again, is that trying to, bring in change because she had been so high profile with Justin Trudeau before their falling out. One other thing I noticed was, to my knowledge, and Cormac, please correct me, there is no deputy prime minister this time around.
No, there is not, and it's not always a role that is handed out. It's up to the prime minister. Obviously, every cabinet minister serves at the pleasure of the prime minister, but he decided not to put in that role, and it sort of goes with the messaging that they had, that they were going to try and keep things slimmer compared to what we saw under Justin Trudeau. And I think an interesting thing as well is the splitting of cabinet, bringing back secretaries of state. Stephen Harper called them ministers of state, but previous governments have done this as well to sort of distinguish between a full cabinet position and sort of a junior cabinet role. And it's something that Carney is bringing back, while Justin Trudeau just basically made everybody in the ministry a full-fledged cabinet minister, which kind of goes back to 2015 with his gender equality promise. And it was revealed after his first cabinet that some of the women in that cabinet had those junior portfolios and was questioned about it. And they said, no, that was an oversight. We're making everybody a full cabinet minister to make sure that we have that full gender parity. So that's something that comes in as well. I just want to jump on a couple of things that Kris mentioned as well on Francois-Philippe Champagne. It's I think a lot of experts going into this talking about the finance minister said he was only finance minister for a short time. If Carney wanted to replace him, now would be the time, because prime ministers generally like to keep the same finance minister in terms of keeping some stability for the business community and the economy who want to be able to plan. They like stability. Jim Flaherty was finance minister for a very long time under the Harper government and was only replaced after he decided to leave politics and Joe Oliver took over. Bill Morneau was for a long time, and Chrystia Freeland was after that until she decided to quit. Now, Freeland's interesting as well, that in the fact that she's keeping the internal trade file. And I think that might go to the fact that she's still very good friends, working friends with Premier Doug Ford, who is the head of the Council of Federation representing all premiers across the country. So having somebody who has his ear would be important when they're trying to get this internal trade barriers, all of these trade barriers. They're hoping to eliminate them by July 1st. So having someone like her in that spot makes sense in terms of reasoning, but it, as we've noted, sort of goes counter to the narrative that they wanted complete change, given that she was by Trudeau's side through most of his tenure, except her resignation, really led to Trudeau's ouster and Carney's ability to come up and become the new prime minister. But on Champagne as well, I think one thing that was mentioned to me was that, and this makes a lot of sense, given Carney's banking background, he may be way more involved in the budget-making process than Justin Trudeau ever was. And traditionally, Marcy Serks, who did cabinet affairs for Trudeau, she told me in an interview that in that scenario, generally, prime ministers come in at the very end, take a look at the budget process, see what has been brought up, and then tinkers with it or gives some new directions where they want to see changes. Carney may be way more involved from the start on how things are going to work out. And so in that scenario, when you have a prime minister who's much more economically focused, when you have a finance minister, you might want somebody who's better at communications, better at selling that plan. That was a problem Justin Trudeau ran into when he became unpopular and Chrystia Freeland struggled with communications and communicating their plan. It became sort of a snowball effect of bad PR for the government. And now they're looking to balance that off a little bit more. And, you can say a lot of things about Champagne, but one thing I think everybody can agree on is that he is an excellent retail politician. He's very smooth in that regard. And
charming.
And so if he wants to sell the budget and they want him as that person, and he has a business background as well, so it's not like he's not on and he had the industry file, so it's not like he's coming out of nowhere, but at the same time, it's sort of a yin and yang approach to how they're going to run this government.
Going on now, it's the Memorial Day sale at Bray & Scarf. Now's your last chance to beat upcoming manufacturer price increases. Save up to 35% on select GE Profile and Cafe appliances, and save on in-stock GE refrigerators and best-selling washers and dryers. Plus, get next-day delivery, online delivery day tracking, and delivery day installation. Visit any of Bray & Scarf's convenient locations or shop online at brayandscarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Ace the vibe check with drinks like lemonade, frozen Fanta Blue Raspberry, or any size drink for just $1.49. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Yeah, and just a final word on, the goal of presenting change. I do wonder if Carney is going to get full marks from the public on presenting change. By my math, I added it up this week. He dropped he kept as many Trudeau cabinet ministers as he dropped, an equal number. They are disproportionately in priority areas: trade, finance, foreign affairs. Those are all previous Trudeau cabinet ministers. On top of that, I understand that there's only 20-something official cabinet ministers, and then you have 10 of these secretaries of state. I don't know if the broader public is going to really make a demarcation between those two. I think most people will say, well, Trudeau's cabinet was 39 people, Carney's cabinet is 38 people. And on top of that, you have a lot of doubling up on portfolios. This was pointed out in a column by Andrew Coyne in the Globe and Mail this morning. I just thought this was interesting. There's a minister of one Canadian economy and a minister of internal trade. There's a minister of international trade and a minister of Canada-US trade, a minister of Indigenous Services and a minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, minister of Defense and a minister of Veterans Affairs, Public Safety and Emergency Management. Those are separated. So there's some doubling up there. It's a big cabinet. At the end of the day, the cabinet we saw from Carney before the election was much smaller than what he unveiled on Tuesday. I think that's fair to say, yes?
Oh, yeah, but I think it was a caretaker cabinet to get them through the election and just sort of hold it over. So there's that thing. And some of those files that we're talking about doubling up on were split under the previous government, such as Crown Indigenous Relations and Indigenous Services, Public Safety and Emergency Management. But there's reasoning that the Trudeau government gave behind that. And I think, you could ask the same questions of the Carney government as well, especially around secretaries of state, whether we needed to have certain carve-outs or not. But there's also a lot of backlash to what was left out, right? Unions are complaining that there's no labor file, even though you could argue that that falls under the jobs ministry. They're not happy with it. There was a lot of backlash as well with the gender diversity role when that was first dropped in his first cabinet. So in some ways, you could be looking at it really reflects your priorities, but in some ways that could lead to backlash as well.
All right, let's look at Wednesday now. That's when the problems kind of started for the Carney cabinet in their first week. And it all came out of really just a few minutes of scrumming with the media before the cabinet ministers even met. They were on their way into the first ever cabinet meeting, and some of these junior ministers stopped to talk with reporters before they had even gone in for their first meeting. And two bad news stories came out of that for the Carney government right away on Wednesday. The new housing minister, Gregor Robertson, was asked if he thinks housing prices should come down, and he said no. He had a nuanced answer about why he said no, but he said no, and that's what made headlines. And then Stephen Guilbeault, the former environment minister, very unpopular in Alberta, weighed in on the issue of developing new pipeline infrastructure in this country, and he basically said we don't need any new pipelines. There's not enough demand for new pipelines. Nobody's looking to build one. Kind of throwing cold water on the messaging that Mark Carney has worked so hard to create, that his government is open to pipeline development. And then, in addition to that, after the cabinet meeting, the new finance minister, François-Philippe Champagne, comes out, says they're not even going to table a budget this year. Kris, what did you think when you heard that from the new finance minister? No budget this year.
What did I think? I don't know. I mean, it was surprising. It's an interesting strategy. I guess an argument to a degree could be made that, they're very new and they're just getting going, and maybe they need to work some things out before they can present a budget. I don't really know what to make of it. And Cormac, you follow this far more closely than I do. Did you find that unusual, strange?
Yes. I've covered federal politics since the end of 2010, early 2011. And only once have we not had a budget, and that was due to COVID. And before that, I understand the only other time we didn't have a budget in the lead up to that was when Paul Martin resigned as finance minister, and that created some havoc. And then they released a statement later in the year when John Manley took over. So it really is not something that happens too often. What I found more surprising out of everything was that they didn't have an explanation. The finance minister came out and said, we're not putting it forward a spring budget. And my mind immediately went to, oh, okay, they're gonna say right off the bat, look, we got to figure out this U.S. scenario. There's a lot of economic uncertainty. We really need to sort of get things together, figure out what's going to happen with the U.S. before we tell Canadians fully what the plan is. We just asked premiers. There are 10 major infrastructure projects that we need to get on the table so that we can budget that out. We need to figure this out with the premiers. We have a first minister's meeting coming up at the start of June, so we can't really put a budget because of all those things. Did we get that explanation from the government? No, we did not. We just got, oh, here's the order of events that happened. We got to have a throne speech and lay out our priorities, and then we'll have an economic update in the fall. And there was really no good explanation. So a huge communications problem, as I think to David's point, was that there were a lot of stumbles right out of the gate. And these are communication issues. And I know that the office of the finance minister has now clarified they need more runway to deal with the U.S. He did a couple of interviews later that day, sort of damage control to try and explain it a little bit better. But I think the damage had already kind of been done when everybody, including people in the business world, were saying, what? I'm not quite sure why we're not getting something out of the gate now, and then maybe at least in the fall, redoing all of it with an economic statement. But I'm curious, Kris, was there a lot of negative reaction from the business world to that?
I think it was more confusion. And I mean, everything you outlined, those are all good reasons for not doing a budget. In my mind, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. There are a lot of questions that need answers, and there are no answers to be had. So it would have been completely legit to come out and say, this is the situation and we just can't do it at this moment in time. So I feel like there's confusion more than anything. There was sort of an expectation that this was coming, and let's see where Prime Minister Mark Carney is going now that he is the Prime Minister, if unofficially, officially. And I think there was just an expectation, and many are left sort of scratching their heads. And then add on top of that, there's no budget, but we are going to get a tax cut. So, I mean, it feels like this was something that maybe you want to scream from the rooftops, and they're not doing that.
Well, they tried to with that order, which wasn't actually an order that Mark Carney signed, and they tried to make that the sole focus. But then the finance minister's scrum afterwards kind of overshadowed what the communications plan was for that day, to make the tax cut the shiny object coming out of that first cabinet meeting. So, and as David pointed out, there was the pipeline question with Guilbeault as well. I will note that he is not in a file that has any authority on that, and he will be a voice at the cabinet table when they're making cabinet decisions. However, it is not his file, so that also led to a question of why a minister who's not in charge of those things is opining about whether we would build a pipeline, not to mention, the fact that just the day before, it was his own prime minister who was saying he was open to this, and then he came out and said, well, I don't really think that this is the smart route to take. But it was Guilbeault as well who dropped his own carbon tax plan when Carney said he wanted to drop it, and then Guilbeault said, yeah, I think we can do it differently. So we're still waiting to see how that difference is moving forward as the government tries to work out all of this stuff. But to the grander point that David made, I think Andrew McDougall, a former director of communications for the Harper government, said it best in a tweet. Every prime minister, I will deliver true cabinet government and empower my team. Every team, at least in the early days. Stumble, gaff, stumble, gaff, gaffety, gaff. Every PMO, the Prime Minister's office, are we sure we want these people out there? Then they exert control over the messaging. So we'll have to wait and see how this sort of shakes out, whether these are just stumbles out of the gate and then everyone starts to fall in line as we move along, or whether this becomes more of an issue for the Carney government as we move forward.
Yeah, I do have to wonder if it was just a rookie move to have those, not to tell those cabinet ministers. It's all well and good to say we want to have a new attitude towards cabinet. We're not going to centralize comms through the PMO the way the Trudeau government did. Great, fine, whatever. But on day one, before you've even gotten in a room together, why are you talking to the media? And why is Stephen Guilbeault talking about pipelines? These are really basic, easy comms things to avoid. And they ran headlong right into them. And then on top of that, adding to your point, Cormac, I couldn't help but notice that on Thursday, Pierre Poilievre kind of ruled the news cycle on Thursday because he did a press conference. Pretty haphazard one, just on the grounds of Parliament Hill. Didn't have a whole lot new to say, but we didn't hear anything from the government, from any cabinet ministers, from the Prime Minister on Thursday. I have to wonder if they were just sitting back in a room somewhere figuring out what is our communication strategy, because what we just did on Wednesday clearly is not going to work for us.
Well, two things I'll say on that is, one, transition periods are always kind of difficult in that stage,
Messy. Yeah, they can be messy.
Yeah. No matter what the government is, you're going to see transitions be difficult because you have a lot of staff. They're trying to figure out their staff behind the scenes. There are a lot of decisions that have to be made. You have to get a chief of staff in place, which Carney hasn't done yet, which is, not to say that this is taking an unusual long time, but there are some things that need to be hit very quickly here because we're having a very short transition period. And so what happens in those scenarios is it sometimes leads to a little bit of chaos behind the scenes as people try to figure out their roles, try to figure out who they need to be speaking to keep in line, those sorts of things. So behind the scenes, there's always going to be that struggle. And every early government is going to have these issues unless they have a long runway before Parliament begins. Carney doesn't really have that. He took over, went straight into an election, then had to take the lay of the land, chose a cabinet. Now we're almost going to be back into Parliament. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So you can understand why mistakes sometimes get made, but it is government, and government has to be held to account for these decisions. I don't think it's highly unusual while those decisions are being made not to have a media event every day. So Pierre Poilievre coming out knowing that after that first cabinet meeting, it was probably going to be a dead day for the government in terms of communications, in terms of announcements and things like that. There's not really a lot to be said at this point for the government until we get Parliament going. So I think from the opposition's point of view, they saw this and said, hey, here's our chance to jump in. And on the conservative side of things, I will say one interesting point that maybe a lot of people didn't see is it seems like their media relations strategy hasn't really changed that much from the election campaign, where Pierre Poilievre came out, gave his statement, and then it was only about 4 questions or so before his communications person was yelling last question and trying to end the news conference very quickly, which is something that we saw during the election campaign. There was also an issue where they tried to move the microphones of the media just before he was about to start because they didn't like the background that was set up. But it was a news conference happening outdoors outside of Parliament Hill. If you want to control the image, there are options for that, but that's all behind the scenes sort of stuff. I'm not sure how much listeners find that interesting, but nonetheless, that's one thing where we'll watch and see whether there's any change, because that media strategy was a point of contention for some conservatives, saying things were not being handled right in the campaign that could have led to the Conservatives not finishing as well as some had thought they could. We'll throw back to Corey Tenike's criticisms of how the campaign was going. So that's one thing that I found interesting as well, is they're not sort of changing that strategy, at least in the early days that we're seeing right now. And we'll wait to see whether, as the Conservatives work through their own internal questions and debriefs about what happened in the campaign, whether we see a change in their strategy as well. But you are right. The Conservatives basically had a free pass to criticize the government that day and use Carney's own words against him on the budget, because Carney said he had a plan, and then the first chance he gets to present that plan, he doesn't fully present that plan, and that's going to be a point of criticism at least through the spring.
Yeah, and it's a good point on the conservative messaging. I noticed that as well. Poilievre, he had kind of a different tone in his original address, but then when it came into Q&As, he went back to the slogans, some of the talking points from the campaign. It's hard to unlearn some of that muscle memory, and you just have to wait for them to write new talking points. If there's a new media strategy, it's still in development right now, and we saw that this week as well, I think. So wrapping it up for today, just keeping an eye on the clock, looking forward. Let's look forward to next week. What are some things, maybe one thing you're watching for from the government? I'll go first. For me, I think early next week, it would be interesting to see Mark Carney come out, do a media event with some deliverables and some timelines. You know, during the campaign, I said I had a plan. The other guy didn't have a plan. We have a plan. Even if you're reiterating some of that, say it again. Give us a plan on, you know, we're going to pass this piece of legislation, this tax cut, this tariff relief measure, and we're going to do that by this date, and just give us a timeline, something to look forward to. That would be my thing to watch for from Carney in the next week, in the second full week of his government. Kris, what about you? What are you watching for?
I feel like he needs a win of some sort, and that's sort of along the same lines of what you just outlined. Like with all the stumbles, and maybe we can call these, you know, growing pains for the new government. And I feel as well that Mark Carney is a very different person than Justin Trudeau. So, you know, some in cabinet sort of getting to know his practices. I do feel like there needs to be a win with the early stumbles and something, as you outlined, you know, we're going to do this or we're going to do this, or maybe some clarity, because people are wondering, is the carbon tax going to come back? So I feel like there needs to be something that people can sort of rally around Mark Carney for, and, you know, sort of reminding Canadians why we elected him.
Cormac?
I don't think we're going to get any of that next week. Maybe a little bit. I think it's the week after that when we get the throne speech. I think they're, like most governments, they're going to wait until their plan is fully in place. We've got King Charles coming to give the throne speech on May 27th. They're going to hold a lot of those details closer to their chest. I think some of it's already been signaled. We know that the income tax cut, the 1% shave off of the lowest income tax bracket, which will basically reduce taxes for 22 million Canadians. That's going to be the first piece of legislation aside from the throne speech. That'll be 2 confidence tests right out of the gate for the government. And then July 1st is that big day. They want to get that income tax cut done by that date. They want to try and have internal trade barriers gone by that date. And they do have that first ministers meeting in early June. So I think next week might be a bit of a dead week almost for big government announcements, but I think they have a lot of internal stuff they need to figure out. The communication strategy, hiring chief of staff, getting all of those elements in place to try and ensure you don't have some of those stumbles out of the gate that we saw this week. I think that is going to be the focus for that week, and that's fine because they've got the really big week on the week of the 26th when we've got a speaker election on the 26th. The House returns. Carney's promised quick action. And so as much as he says he's going to do all that stuff, I think the rubber hits the road on the 26th when Parliament returns. He's going to have to show Canadians that he can follow through on his word after a lot of questions this week on the budget issue.
Yeah, maybe just watch for them to get through next week without any bad headlines and then hit the ground running with the throne speech with the resumption of Parliament week after. Yeah, I could see it going down like that.
2 quick things also about next week. We get inflation data on Tuesday, and this is for April. So is there going to be some tariff noise in there? And then retail sales data also comes out next Friday. So that's a snapshot of the Canadian consumer with all of the U.S. trade tensions still sort of not settled.
Yeah, maybe an opportunity for some reaction, some positive messaging from the government when those 2 reports come out. Yeah, good point. All right, we'll have to cut it off there for this week, but thank you guys so much. Great chat today, and we'll see what the next 7 days of news has in store for us. Cormac, Sweeney, and Kris McCusker, thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Thanks for hosting.
Anytime.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Ace the vibe check with drinks like lemonade, frozen Fanta Blue Raspberry, or any size drink for just $1.49. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.